Okay, so today we're going to learn about classical recording. So while Pro Tools decides not to boot at all, we'll just go straight to the presentation and it'll be fine. All right, so today is Classical Recording 101, and my name is Dr. Jonathan Cressy. I give a lot of audio panels here at MAGFest, and this is the first time I've worked with orchestra. You can get in contact with me at jonathan@fundamentalsounds.com. I'm also the assistant professor of sound recording technology at Texas A&M Kingsville, down in South Texas. And basically, my background, just so you know that you can trust me, is that I have been recording classical music for well over 25 years. Basically, my recording career started at Peabody Conservatory, where I got a degree in trumpet performance and recording arts and sciences. And basically, that's what we did. We recorded classical music 100% of the time, all the time, for a ton of years. And that's really what Fundamental Sounds did for a long time, until I became a professor and started recording a bunch of other stuff too. But I do have a lot of interesting thoughts about classical music and recording and where we can go with that. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover our mindset of recording, the tools that we're going to use, and then some of the technique, okay? And depending on how interested you are, we can scoot through different stuff depending. But the first one is the mindset, okay? Classical music, this is my definition of classical music, all right? It's small c classical. I know it's capitalized there, but small c classical. So not the era, but the genre of music, okay? And it's performance and compositional dominant. So what we're looking at here is pop music is more production dominant, where classical music relies on performance. This is starting to shift, okay? Like your previous panel was a remote recorded string quartet. Most of that recording is not performance-based, right? It can't be, because they're not together, they're not performing with one another. As much as I love them to death, they're not. Their engineer or whoever's putting that together is actually assembling the performance, because they have to. So the idea of classical music being a live thing, okay? And that's really where we're coming from this. Now it's starting to shift a little, because the more orchestras I record, the more I am being required to record them in a more modern fashion, okay? I can tell you some stories when we get to that point, but it's just something to think about. What is your mindset? I'm not saying one is better than the other, but you have to know what people want in order to give them what they want, okay? So your intent is what's going to drive the method in which you're going to record, okay? Is your intent to create, or is your intent to capture? And do those words like lock in a little bit here, right? If your intent is to capture, for those of you who record classical music in a live setting, right? Maybe you are recording an archival recording of a choir or of a symphony orchestra. In that sense, maybe your intent is to capture what they did. But if you're actually recording for a CD, you might want to create, where you are actually going around and moving people and adding extra microphones in order to create something that might not actually be able to be experienced live. Remember, pop music is 100% cannot be experienced live. Well, let's not say 100%. 75% of the time cannot be experienced live, especially now with computers. You know, you've got drummers using MIDI to do their drums live, because we have computers that are that fast. But basically, you want to think about creation or capture. Okay, so the traditional method is a capture method, and this relies on the artist to know what the hell they're doing, okay? So like it relies on them having practiced. Here's a funny story. So I've been in the Maryland area for a really long time, and I was asked to record a brass quintet. And I went to the brass quintet. They'll remain nameless. And I went to the brass quintet, and they were at University of Maryland. And I came up, and I put my 2 microphones up front, and we were in the hall, and I adjusted them where I thought they sounded best. And I'm like, all right, let's do this. And they're like, wait, so you're not going to put a microphone on every instrument? And I was like, no. And they're like, well, how are you going to balance us? And I was like, what, you don't practice? Like that's not my job, that's your job. Like, and I'm a classical player. I'm like, don't you guys practice to be, to be balanced? And they were very offended. And granted, I was a little bit salty, and that was probably warranted to be offended. But I was like, look, go to your professor, right? Go to Chris Gecker and ask him how they record the American Brass Quintet. Just ask him what they do. And they did, and they found out that that's what they do. They just put 2 microphones up and they play, and that's usually how it works, okay? But as we are starting to scoot more and more into the modern era, a lot of people want spot microphones. Okay, so modern method is where we get the spot microphone. It doesn't rely on the performer, it relies on the engineer to create the performance. And this is happening more and more and more because people are doing things away from one another. The big tipping point, as everybody knows, is COVID, when all of a sudden the only way you could perform was over internet, right? Doing these combined things where someone would get a video from everybody and they would put it together. I made many of those things over that time period. And actually in the previous panel, someone asked, well, can you rehearse on the internet? You cannot rehearse on the internet. And there will never be a way for you to rehearse on the internet live, right? It's physics, and unless we develop Ender's Game Ansibles or something that are like instantaneous light transfer, there is no way that you will ever be able to rehearse online with any without real reliability. Because you remember, there's always going to be delay, and that delay is enough to put someone from here into the corner of the room or whatever. Remember, 11 milliseconds of a delay is 10 feet. So, to your brain. So you're going to have delay because of just stuff. All right, so here's an example of the 2 different methods. Let's see if I can get this to work now. Hey, I know there's no internet connection. Why are you not using my... All right, hold on a sec. Here, we'll use my phone. Maybe that'll do it. But we're going to start. So because we're using the big C classical, small C classical idea, my first example of a live concert that I recorded is a jazz band, okay? So we're calling it classical because it's all live instruments. It was live recorded, and we're letting them do the work, okay? What I want to show you here is, and I have other examples of actual symphony orchestras, but what I want to show you is I actually have the 2 different methods captured as one. Because we had live sound. So we had somebody putting a spot mic on every instrument. So every instrument had a bell mic. And then I decided to record it in the traditional classical method out front. And how we hear that and how we can sort of hear the difference between the 2 methods is going to be very interesting as soon as it decides to load up. I don't know why Pro Tools is deciding that I'm not good enough today. Yeah, but I've got my iLock in, so it shouldn't use the Wi-Fi, and I'm not super sure why it is using the Wi-Fi. I'm like, wait a second. I brought an iLock, so this wouldn't be a problem. But here. The only other thing that I can think of is plug the iLock back in. Oh, maybe. Let's try that. No, it's me. It's not you. I'm not taking ownership of this. It's Pro Tools. It's safer. Let's just be honest. Pro Tools. Yeah. All right. While we're listening to it, this is the. So we were submitting this recording to Downbeat for a Downbeat award. And let me turn this down, and we'll turn it back up once I know what this sounds like. Wow, all sorts of weird stuff is going on. Cool. All right. This is what we're going to do because I have never had this much crap go on. We're actually going to restart. All right, while I'm talking, I'll talk about this. So we're restarting the computer because everything is broken. So what we did is we recorded the jazz band, and what we'll do is a little bit of technique, okay, while we're looking at this. If you're doing something that is involving capture of a large ensemble or even a small ensemble, right, capture is going to involve as few microphones as absolutely possible, all right? My old professor, he used to talk about you've got 2 ears, you should use 2 microphones, and that's it. Because we're working in stereo, that's usually what we're going to do, right? How many of you are working in higher order, like immersive stuff? Anybody? What do you mean by that? Are you recording to Dolby Atmos, or are you recording to RO3D or any of that stuff? No? Yes? No? Okay. So if you were doing that, you'd have to use, cool, everything needs to force quit. You would need to use more microphones, right? So a typical immersive microphone setup is like 11 microphones, all in one array, that you have to put up on one stand, and it's a little crazy. But normally, if you're recording and you're capturing, you're going to be using 2 microphones, right? Now, the way I do it, so this is all personal preference, but the way I do it is it goes the 2 microphones that are capturing the group as a whole, and it's capturing their performance. You adjust those so you're happy with what's going on. And then if there's something that needs to be emphasized, like if there's a harp, or if there's something that is not very loud, then what you'd want to do is you'd want to put a spot mic on that. But I always start with just 2 microphones. So for instance, if you are interested, you can go to WETA. So I did a thing for the Choral Arts Society of Frederick, and they did like this Sounds of the Season or Song of the Season or something, where they did a bunch of Christmas songs. And what you'll do is, if you watch the video that they submitted, we recorded Silent Night at Hood College in their, not their auditorium, but their big church, okay? And that recording is made with 2 microphones. And it has a piano, it has string quartet, and it has a choir. And there are 4 microphones up, but only 2 of those microphones are being used in the recording. And I was able to get an ensemble sound by just asking the string quartet to play louder, right? Asking the pianist to play softer. And it was really cool because it all balanced out and it was only 2 microphones. All right, so let's see if this will now work. So it's requiring me to have internet connection. Awesome. Ooh, is it going to work? Hey, at least I have my sound back. Oh, do it! Do it! Go! Oh, look at that. It worked. Thank you, Avid. We prayed to the Avid gods and it happened. By the way, we'll talk a little bit about this in a little bit, but Avid Pro Tools is not my DAW of choice when it comes to recording classical music. In fact, most classical music I actually record on a hard disk recorder because it's portable, battery powered, and I'm in places that almost never have any kind of place to plug anything in. So I just use those like NP batteries or the batteries they use for video cameras, the V-mount batteries that run my portable system. And I just run a Sound Devices 788T because there's no real need for anything fancy with audio. You just need 24-bit 96. You don't even really need that, but it runs it perfectly fine. They're cheap as hell online, and I just use that. I run that as my classical setup. Yes?
Field recording mics are a good substitute, right? Just trying to get a feel for that.
Say that again?
Are field recording mics a good substitute? They do 2496 as well.
Field recording. I actually don't know what. So the question is are field recording mics a substitute? Is that a brand?
No, they're basically just portable microphones that have two condenser mics.
So the brand would be Zoom, for instance? Like
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You can use Zoom stuff, right? For me, I'm always looking at, so I own a Zoom F6, right? I bought one of those during COVID because I was trying to do remote recording with a drummer who didn't know how to do anything. So I sent him the Zoom F6 and a bunch of microphones, and then on Zoom I told him where to put it so that he could overdub some stuff for me. And the 32-bit recording was there to sort of help with that. But I have actually used the Zoom F6 for a classical recording, and it's perfectly fine. I mean, you don't have to get anything fancy. It's fine. In fact, the Sound Devices one at the time, because I needed 8 inputs, is actually cheaper than the mix pre's, which are much more expensive now. But I digress. So here's the song. Okay, here's the tune. And let me zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on. So here we have hall mics, and then I have all of the spot mics that are going on. Okay, so if we come here and I grab the hall, this is what it sounds like. Let's make sure. Oh, hold on. Okay, that's good. I don't know how loud this is going to be, so we'll start out with this. So this is just the hall mic. It's going to sound weird because we're in mono, but okay, so that's just the hall mics. And that was a A-B pair of microphones. That means 2 omnidirectional microphones set approximately 40 centimeters apart on a bar, and it was at the level. And what's funny about this is that was right behind the conductor at the level of his head. Okay? The reason why I do that is, one, because conductors always want to hear what they heard on stage. They don't want to hear what everybody else heard. They want to hear what they hear, so it's got to be behind them. And the guy who conducts that ensemble is 6'9". He's huge. And so I'm like, man, if I just put it at the normal spot, like where most people's heads are, he's probably not going to get it right. So I put it extra high, sort of like just above his head. And that was what we got. And in that picture of in the picture that at the beginning of my slideshow, that's actually the hall that they're in. So that's the hall that they perform in. Now, it's not. That's what the audience would have heard, right? They would have heard it a little bit worse because it was further out. It would have been a little bit more dead. So what we do is we can take those spot mics and we can sort of add them in to create something a little different. So I've done a little bit of a mix here of the spot mics to sort of give it still that live feeling, but now it's a lot more present. And here's just the hall. Here are the spot mics. This gives it a little bit more context. This is the hall mic. So that still sounds natural, right? It sounds natural. It's just using the spot mics to highlight the stuff. And what it does, right, when you hear it, it makes you go from, oh, I'm in the hall to, oh, I'm sitting like maybe in the section, right? I'm getting closer to the band. Now, that was what I gave them. And they're like, no, we don't want it to sound like that. It's not crisp enough. And I was like, oh, what do you want it to sound like? And he's like, he sent me a thing. And I'm like, but that's a studio recording. And he's like, yeah, but what can you do? So yeah, this is what they wanted. You notice now, here, I'll go back and forth. You how one has more hall around it? Now this sounds like it was in a studio, with just like a little ring of the hall behind it to give it like, oh, maybe it wasn't in a studio. And of course, the only way they know is at the very end we left the applause in, so you can hear the applause, so they know it wasn't in a studio. But so then, what I'm doing is I'm demonstrating the difference between capture and creation. When I captured it, it was hall, spot mics, okay? When I did the creation, it was spot mics, hall. Just a little bit. I was treating the hall almost as just a reverb, right? Like a reverb off of an algorithmic reverb. I wouldn't even have needed the hall. I wouldn't have had to put the mics up. And that's the difference. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate between the concept of capturing and the concept of creating. Okay? So like for another instance here, another example. Okay? Hopefully, I won't need Pro Tools again, but let's just leave it up in case. So if I go here, for instance, would you rather listen to a symphony orchestra or a wind ensemble? Wind ensemble. Okay. Thank you, Tom. So here is a wind ensemble. Let's open it with QuickTime. I recorded this in 2002. And this is at the University of Louisiana Lafayette Wind Ensemble playing Candide, okay? And this was recorded with 2 microphones, okay? It was 2 microphones at the front of the stage. It was 2 Neumann TLM 103s, which are cardioid only, and they were at the level of the conductor's head. Okay, they're tuning. Here we go. Guys walking on stage. I could have edited this, but I didn't. I'm sorry. By the way, this was also recorded direct to CDR, because that's what we did back then. So again, this is capture. Okay? It's captured, it's balanced, but that's because the group was balanced. So all I was doing was capturing the performance. And one other one, let's listen to a symphony orchestra. And this is, actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but this is the PG Philharmonic. This is their Mahler 2 performance from 2014, I don't know, somewhere back in the day. This is recorded at University of Maryland in the barn. Have you guys been there? No? I don't know if anybody's from University of Maryland. Okay, so they have so you know outside where the orchestra played? Like in that huge thing? That's what their hall looks like. It's like 30 meters tall, and it's just hugely ringy. It's a big joke in the acoustics world. They're all like, oh yeah, somebody misplaced a 0 when they were adding the feet together, and like, no, we wanted 30 feet, and you gave us 300, right, or something. So this is Mahler 2, and this was done with 2 omnidirectional microphones off the stage by about 6 feet, and they were about 18 feet in the air. Oh, it's real soft. So we go a little bit. So this sound, is what it's like a traditional orchestral sound, right? It sounds like the CD recordings from Mercury Living Presence and stuff like that. It's capturing their performance and not doing any creation. All I did was put the two mics up, put them where I thought it sounded best, recorded it, and that was it. Right? Nothing else was done to this. As you can tell, it's very soft. So there you go. So in that sense, when we're looking at the method of doing these things, that we have all of the tools and the techniques that you want to go through. Hold on, let's grab Classical 101. Those are our examples. Okay, so let's look at tools. I like hard disk recorders. Okay, hard disk recorders are portable, and that's usually you have to go where classical musicians are, right? When we talk about this, you want to go to places that sound good. Unless you have a studio that you're working with, most of the time, the studios aren't big enough to hold large ensembles, right? There might be one in the Maryland area that can hold an entire orchestra, right? Most of them are really small, so you're going to have to go to halls, okay? The other thing is that they're DAW agnostic, meaning they just create wave files. They're usually poly wave files, and you can edit them in Reaper, or you can edit them in Pro Tools, or you can edit them wherever you want, and it doesn't matter. But when you record into Pro Tools, then there's a level, or other things. There's usually a level of manipulation to get it back out of Pro Tools. So I would just rather go with that. Also, because of what just happened, right? I switched to Mac because I almost never have problems. Except for that one time. Like how many panels I've given here? This is my 5th panel this week. And this is the first time I've had to reboot my computer. But that happens. If that happens in a concert, you are screwed, right? Because they want to capture it. It only happens once. That's the thing about classical recording. It happens once. And that's it. So you really want to have something that will do this. If you want to go straight to a computer, I still say buy the hard disk recorder, because most of the time you can actually run your stuff through the hard disk recorder. It acts as the interface, and you can record it to the recorder and to your computer at the same time, and then you have a backup, right? So I really, really recommend that you do this. Okay. I think you need to have at least 4 channels in your recorder. 8 is the max you will probably ever need, but at least 4. The reason why I say 4 is because you have 2 for your main mics, and then you have 2 more for either spots or flanks, and we can talk about that. But like sometimes you might need flanks to capture stuff that's going on the outside of the orchestra, like the cellos and the second and third violins and stuff, and the basses. But usually you might, or for instance, like I recorded the Maryland Symphony a couple times, and they had 2 up front, and they had 2 on the woodwinds. So they used actually 5 microphones. So they had a stereo pair in the front and a stereo pair on woodwinds in the back. Okay? Sound devices, Zooms are great. Tascams are fine too if you have them. Some people have been complaining about Tascams quality controls, so that's why I'm not recommending them. You don't need 32-bit recording, right? 32-bit recording is basically a crutch of some sorts, and you don't really need it. Get the cheap one. The cheap one is the one that only goes up to 24 bits. Real quick, 1 bit equals 6 decibels of headroom, right? So if you have an 8-bit recorder, it basically gives you a cassette tape. It's 48 decibels of dynamic range. So if you've got something that's 24 bits, that's 144 decibels of dynamic range. That is plenty dynamic range for you not to clip it, okay? Just, it's like, because that's... I was young once, all right, and I had a mixing console, and I had my 2-track CDR that I was recording directly to, and I used to sit there and ride the gain knobs to make sure that it was as loud as possible all the time. I was like sitting there doing this, and of course, if you don't know the tune, you might get like a whap, and then you're out of luck, right? So don't do what I used to do. But yes, you're perfectly fine with 24-bit. As far as 96 kilohertz versus anything else, the only reason we do that is for marketing purposes. I mean, I own a label, and when I produce a classical recording, I have to produce sort of like the audiophile thing, and the audiophiles are like, oh, we want, 24-bit 192 kilohertz or whatever, you don't need it, right? I do it because I don't want to just say that it's not 192 kilohertz and be lying, that I upsampled it, which is what most people do. So I'll record it like 192, or maybe I'll record it 96 or whatever. Really, 44.1 or 48 are perfectly fine, right? 48 if you plan on putting it on a video, just because it's easier to get in and out of a video using 48 kilohertz. So pretty much everything is, for me, is either 96 or 48, because everything goes on YouTube. So I basically have to do that. Any questions about the recorder? Thoughts about it? No? We're good? Okay. So you need stands and cables. I know this is like the boring stuff, but no one talks about this. All right. Use lighting stands. Lighting stands are light, they're tall, and you can carry them around, right? They fold up really good. Use lighting stands. Like Manfrotto makes a lighting stand that will go 18 feet. And if you can put a pair of microphones on those things, and they won't fall down, and it's not like carrying a K&M stand that weighs 20,000 pounds and only goes, 8 feet, right? So get lighting stands. They go high and they're light, right? However, you might need a sandbag or a backpack if they don't if they make you put it in the audience because of fire code. Sometimes you need to weigh it down so it doesn't fall over. Then, for your audio cables, right, we have normal mic cables. But usually you don't want to be in the same spot as everybody else. You want to be somewhere else. I recommend getting something called a cat snake. Cat snakes, it's an Ethernet cable that can carry all Ethernet cables can carry 4 phantom-powered microphone signals on one Ethernet cable. And the Ethernet cable can be run over 1,000 feet. So I have a pair of cat snake cables, so I can run 8 microphones 500 feet, or I can run 4 microphones 1,000 feet if I connect the 2 cables together. So now I only need the amount of cable it takes to go from the stand to the cat snake balun that converts the XLR to Ethernet. All right? I highly recommend these. Absolutely, they're game changing. Because I don't know if you've ever had to carry 300 feet of microphone cable, but it is not fun, right? So just don't. Microphones, okay? Everybody wants to know about this stuff. Always do it in pairs. When you're buying microphones, buy them in pairs for classical recording. Even if you're only doing one person, right? Because what we record, we mostly record stereo. That's our job, is to record stereo. So we want to make sure we have stereo pairs of everything, right? So think in pairs. Always buy 2 at a time. Try to buy matched pairs if you can, but nowadays that's not a thing. People don't really do matched pairs anymore, but they're good. Think about your 2 types, right? Now, obviously these aren't the 2 types, but traditionally, people who capture orchestral music use omnidirectional microphones because they are fully transparent. They tend not to have any real frequency movement. This is a 101, there are some things where there are microphones that are built to be further out in the audience. Those are called diffuse field microphones, and they actually have a bump in the high register, usually around 10 kilohertz. Because they're meant to be further away. And then you have free field microphones, which are meant to be close to the stage. The free field ones are dead flat. The ones that end up in the audience have a bump at 10K. But that brightness that everybody gets from that 10K has become like a moniker. People think that it makes things shiny, right? They like it. So just omnis are considered transparent. Cardioids, on the other hand, they isolate you from your room. So if you have a crappy room that you're in, like a bad hall, then you might want to use cardioids instead, okay? So with cardioids, you lose low end. Cardioids do not go as low as omnis. So some people will actually pair cardioids with omnis. So you have 4 microphones on one stand. So you have 2 omnis on the outside and a cardioid pair in the middle. You use the cardioid pair to capture most of the orchestra, and then you blend in the omnis to give you low-end presence. And so that's why they're using it. So they're using them as almost like frequency helpers, for lack of a better term, okay? Eventually you will need both, but decide which one you'd rather have. I personally started with cardioids because I did a lot of like audition tapes and stuff like that, and cardioids helped because I was in all different rooms. But then eventually I went to Omnis because, like with PG Phil, when I talked with their late conductor, he's passed away now, but he was like, I want to know what it sounds like exactly. And so I was like, okay. So I put up Omnis instead. In general, I would go with small diaphragm condenser microphones. The reason why we go with small diaphragms is they're small and they're light and you can fly them easier above the orchestra, okay? If you go large diaphragm, they're fine, but you're putting up a chunk of, like a half-pound chunk of audio up 25 feet in the air. It could tip and come down, and it's just not worth it at that point, right? Don't buy ribbon microphones for classical recording. Okay, just don't. Ribbon microphones are very colored, so they don't sound real. Even though Royer on their website is like, no, this is how the ear hears. It's not how the ear hears. It doesn't sound real at all, right? It rolls off the entire top end of your music, right? And they're super delicate. So like if you put them somewhere, I recorded one concert with one once, a pair, and someone decided to turn the fan on, and it was right above, and the air came buffeting down, and it ripped both of the ribbons in half, like the ribbon diaphragms. So just don't use them, okay? They're used mostly in studio because they're very delicate, and because if you, like for instance, if you're a string players like ribbons, much like trumpet players, because strings are obnoxiously bright when you're right up on them, right? Strings are not meant to be heard from like right in front of them. They want to be out in the hall, and the further away you get from an instrument like a string or a trumpet or anything, you lose high energy. So you lose high end. So in order to mimic that, they put a ribbon microphone close to a string player, and it makes them sound like they're further away. Does that make sense? And so that's why like trumpet players like to use them. Stupid funny thing though, okay? I was producing an album called Brasiliana, which is for a trumpet, horn, and piano trio. That you need spot mics for that, because that was just weird, okay? And the trumpet player, he like came in and was obnoxiously bright. Obnoxiously bright. Like I have never heard a trumpet player as bright as he was. And I'm like, what's going on, man? His name's Nairam. And I'm like, Nairam, why do you sound like this? And he goes, well, I was practicing and I wanted to record myself. And so I went on Facebook, and there's a trumpet player who will remain nameless who says all trumpet players should use ribbon microphones. So I bought one. And then I put it on my mic and I practiced, and I was like, man, I'm not bright enough. So I kept pushing my sound until I was bright enough for my recordings. And then he went into the real world and sounded like garbage. And it was because he didn't realize ribbon microphones just basically roll off your top end. And so, again, it's not something you want to do when you're capturing an orchestra, right? You want something as flat as possible. Okay, recommendations for this. So the industry standards for classical music is Neumann, Sennheiser, DPA, and Schoeps. Okay, DPA and Schoeps are the most expensive microphones I have ever encountered, unless you were lucky enough to buy a pair of Schoeps microphones at B&H at Christmas, because somehow they were like, hey, they're $1,500 for a pair. And like, I don't know why. Like, I was like, what's going on? Are they going out of business? I'm confused. So that's the first time I've ever owned a pair of Schoeps microphones. Neumanns are the cheapest of this group. Sennheiser are the next cheapest, because Sennheiser owns Neumann, so they're sort of the same thing. These are expensive, right? You're going to be paying $1,000 for a pair at least, okay? If you can't afford that, just get the microphones that have the lowest self-noise that you can deal with. If you're doing live music, that's not really, it's not really a problem, because where you're recording it, there's going to be air conditioning, there's going to be room noise, there's going to be audience maybe, and so the self-noise of the microphone will not come through. But if you are recording in a studio where things are super quiet and super controlled, you will hear the hiss of microphones, especially in classical music, because we have super low lows and super high highs, right, as far as volume goes. So always shoot for the lowest self noise. Any questions about this? All right, so let's skip here. Well, let's look at DAWs real quick. Okay, you got to pick the DAW. You have to decide whether you're going to be recording with it or editing with it. That's my sort of thing here, right? I don't use DAWs to record classical music. I told you I use a hard disk recorder. I use them to edit. And they're at this moment on the Macintosh, right, on Mac OS, there is only one that you can use. And that is called, it's Reaper. And you have to use Kohler Classical or Reclassical. I haven't used Reclassical yet. I just found out about it like a week ago. But what they are source destination editors. And that is essential for editing classical music, is source destination. If you're on a PC, you can choose to use Samplitude or Peer Mix if you would like. But they, again, are like a whole lot of money, and they don't do anything Kohler Classical won't. So I recommend Kohler Classical, okay? And if we have time sort of at the end, I can show you Kohler Classical and how you might edit something. But basically, it's a skin that goes over top of Reaper. So you buy Reaper or don't buy Reaper, don't care, whatever you want to do. And then you have to buy Kohler Classical. Jonathan Kohler's a really nice guy, but he will not let you not buy it, so you got to buy it. But you get it, and what it does is it basically is a suite of scripts that allow you to arrange your takes underneath your music. Like you have 9 groups that you can stick your takes in, and then you can go, okay, I want this to go here. So you say in, out, and then you put in, out, and it goes boop, and it puts it right there. And then you're like, oh, but I want to change something in the middle there. And so you zoom in and you're like in, out, and you go find the take, oh, in, out, and it goes boop, and it puts it in the middle, and it source destinations it. So it's also called 3 and 4 point editing. It's basically like a video editor. How many of you have ever edited videos? It's like a video editor, but with audio, where you can be like, no, I want to put a clip right in here, and it sticks it in there. Right? It's how we used to edit classical music in digital back in like the 90s and 2000s. There isn't another DAW that does it, so you need to do that. The other good thing about Kohler Classical is if you do use multiple microphones, it keeps everything synced together. So you don't it groups them all together, so you're not like accidentally moving the spot mic for the flute when you shouldn't be, right? It's actually creating them as groups. It's very, very good. But I don't recommend anything else for recording classical music, right? Pro Tools is used for music that's locked to a grid. That's the best use of Pro Tools if you're recording. It is terrible at editing classical music. Absolutely terrible. It's just it's so bad I don't even want to think about it because I've had to do it and it's awful. But Reaper is great. Okay, monitors real quick. Just buy headphones. Okay, for headphones, you want if you're in the room recording, you want IEMs. So Etymonic makes IEMs. The reason why there's a number sign there is it depends on your budget, right? So it's ER and then pick a number 2, 3, or 4. Do the XRs because the SRs are supposed to be super flat and they're also obnoxiously bright. And I don't know why they think that that's flat. It's not at all. But those isolate. So if you're in the room with your orchestra or with your classical musicians, you won't be, like the sound won't leak through the headphones and then color how you place things. If you're mixing or mastering or whatever, I would use open back headphones. And the ones that most people used to use is the Sennheiser HD600s, and now they use the HD650s. But any kind of open back, transparent-ish headphones are great. If you are dead set on having monitors, the only monitors that I would recommend are the Genelec 83 or 80 monitors. And if you're doing classical music, you can go with the tiny ones. Like you can go with the 8010s, which are only like $1,000 for a pair, because you're not dealing with a ton of low-end information that you really need to know like how it lines up. It's just there because you recorded it. You don't need to like line up kick drums and basses and stuff, right? So those are the recommendations for that. All right, here we go. Technique, real quick. We talked about bit rate and dynamic range. 16-bit is 96 decibels of dynamic range. It's fine, right? Like I've recorded like that recording of the wind ensemble. That was 16-bit 44.1. Like that was straight to a CDR. It's fine, right? Most of the stuff you're going to find is 24-bit 144. Anything bigger than that is just marketing, and that's why we do it. You know, I'll be honest. I make high bit rate and high sample rate just so I can sell it to audiophiles. It's the same thing. I personally don't hear a difference, okay? But I could be wrong. So 44.1, perfectly fine, okay? Everything in the end is going to be converted to MP4 because no one's going to buy your CD. So it's going to be streaming, so it's all going to be MP4 anyway, right? I even I guess Apple lossless, like it downloads 24-bit 192, but in fact it actually downloads an Apple TV thing or something, and then it ends up just giving you a compressed thing anyway. So just go with whatever is easiest for you. Like for instance, a lot of times I go with 48 because I own a lot of old school reverb gear. Like I own a Quantec Yardstick, which is incredibly expensive back when it existed. And it's like the most transparent reverb I've ever used. It's great for adding extra reverb to a classical recording, but it's so old that it only works in 48.4.1 or 48. So I'm stuck. Like, well, if I want to use the Quantec, then I've got to use that. Now, Logic now just came out with a Quantec plugin. So in the Logic DAW, it has the algorithm in there because it's just an algorithmic reverb. So it's a copy. And it's beautiful and it sounds great. But then I'm like, but do I want to use Logic? Not really. So I'm trying to figure out a way to route my audio through Logic like it is an external thing and then use it that way. If I ever figure that out, I'll let you know. But that, sample rate's just a thing. All right, I don't have a ton of time, but you have 2 ears, use 2 microphones. More is needed for clarity, but keep it to a minimum, all right? The more microphones you use, the more phase issues you're going to have. That's the other thing. You have to also decide if your spot microphone on the harp all the way in the back of the hall is coming through your ears at the same time as your mic's at the top, right? It's going to sound like the harp is in the front row for those of us who are sensitive to time. So you may have to delay your spot mics the distance to the microphone. So make sure you take measurements, like how far away is that harp microphone? Is it 20 feet, 25 feet? And then you can use a delay plugin to delay that so that it sounds like it's in the back of the hall. Right? That is a technique that no one ever talks about, but you really should do. Some people don't like to do it because they think, oh, I want it to jump out in front of me, but it's weird. When it's done incorrectly, like you'll listen to the harp and you're like, wait a minute, this is weird. It's like pianos. How many of you are pianists? Okay, so you know that that when people listen to piano, that the highs are on the left and the lows are on the right, right? Like when audiences listen to you play piano. Yeah, like when you listen, it's the other way. And boy, when classical pianists go, but this doesn't sound right. And I'm like, no, man, it doesn't sound like the way you hear it, but it's the way I hear it. Because I get weirded out when I listen to a recording and I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, oh my God, the piano's backwards. And I actually had a recording I did for a clarinet duo, right? And they actually, I actually had to ask them, like, hey, is it backwards? All right, cool, thanks. But I was like, did you guys record the piano backwards on purpose? And they're like, oh yeah, we did, because it was so noisy, we turned it the other way. Like I thought they had just reversed the microphones in the mix, but no, it was because they actually had to turn the piano around. So that was something that's interesting. Stereo recording, I'm just gonna get to this. Coincident stuff is when you have 2 microphones right on top of one another. We don't use this a lot, but if you need a 1-point stereo, that would be like your Zoom H4s and stuff, that 1-point stereo, you can buy a stereo microphone and use that. But a lot of people are using spaced pairs. And the reason why they're using spaced pairs is because that is how you utilize omnidirectional microphones. Omnidirectional microphones can only be used in a stereo situation as a A-B pair, where they are approximately 40 centimeters apart. The furthest I like is 55, like I've done the math, and that's the biggest that I like. If you're going to be using cardioid microphones, you have to use near coincident pairs, which are your ORTF, NOS. You're basically putting them at an angle and a certain distance. And you can buy stereo bars that do this automatically for you. And I would recommend it, because protractors suck when you're trying to get things up there. Okay? One last thing I want to leave you with is, by the way, take a picture of this if you have it. This is the stereo recording angles visualizations by Singspiel Audio. It's in German, but you can get through it. It's fine. The Germans love this stuff. They absolutely love diagrams. And what you can do is you can put in your distances. Remember, it's all in meters, right? So you put in your distances, and you can actually see where your orchestra will fit between your speakers. And it's really kind of cool. This is the last thing I'm going to leave with you, okay? When you're placing your microphones, distance from the object that you're recording or your group is your reverb blend, okay? It's called direct sound to reverberant sound, right? The further out you get, the more into the diffuse field you get, and the more reverb you will get, and the darker your recording will get. And then the vertical is your blend. Like, how do you want your instruments to blend together, right? So if you put it down lower, there'll be more like this is the instrument, this is the instrument. The higher you go up, the more it's going to be a blended sound. So for orchestras, I try to get relatively high, or at least as high as the conductor's head on the podium, because that's what he's hearing, he or she is hearing, right? But if I'm doing something that's more of a creative thing, you might go a little lower because you want things to be more personal and close. But those are the two things that I listen for. I find the distance first this way to find the blend. And then I raise it up and I raise it down. And you would be surprised, an inch will change everything. A technique that you can use to help with this is plugging one of your ears and walking with your other ear facing the group. Just walking until you find a pleasant place to stop where it sounds good. And that's where you start with your microphones. And then you move up and down. All right, there's so much stuff to talk about when it comes to classical recording. And if you have questions, I think I've got to get off the stage so that other people can come and chat and do stuff. I'm happy to answer them outside. And if you're more interested in this, I can make more specific panels. Or you can email me here at, let's go straight to the end. You can go ahead and email me. Email me, or you can Twitter me, or I have that Blue Sky thing too, which is the same fun sounds. Just contact me, and if you have any questions, I am happy to help. I am here to educate and to tell you all of the secrets, right? I don't keep secrets. I don't care. I hope all of you do excellent, awesome recordings, okay? So thank you very much, and I really appreciate it.